We've already done a film with the latest Porsche 911 GT3 looking very specifically at the manual gearbox. But the rest of the car's not bad either, and it seemed a shame to ignore it. So, welcome to a full review of the 991 Gen 2 GT3.
From within the first mile of driving this car, I wanted to own one. There we are, I've said it. It is that good. I was instantly jealous of anyone that gets to drive one of these every single day. There is so much to enjoy about it, and at all speeds. I thought those days might be coming to an end where you could have a car that was just thrilling at 9,000 RPM in this car's case, but also just pottering along like this. The steering, this E-Pass system, they now seem to have got it. I would love to try this back to back with the 997, because the first time I drove this was just at slow speeds on roads that I know, but in the wet, and we're on Cup 2 tyres, and even just cruising around, short shifting, there was so much information coming back through the wheel. It was a massive breath of fresh air, to be honest, compared to so many other modern cars. But it's not just the steering either. This engine, this new 4-litre engine, which actually we'll have a break here and I'll tell you a bit more about this engine. That engine is essentially from the 911 Cup car. So we've got new pistons, new liners, it's got a new crankshaft with the oil feed through the middle, and most importantly perhaps it's got a fixed valve train, so no hydraulic valve adjusters in there. They say it won't go out of alignment for, well, it's good for 200,000 miles certainly, thanks to new materials that they've used. All of this, well, it effectively makes it rev more freely. It's putting out 500 horsepower, so that's 493 brake horsepower and 339 pounds for the torque. So there we are. Now we know a bit more about the technicalities involved in it, the internals. But just to drive around in it, there's something to enjoy at every level. There's now more torque low down, so if you short shift at 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, you don't feel like you're missing out somehow. And of course, because you've got the manual gearbox as well, actually just shifting's enjoyable. So again, you don't feel like you're missing out if you actually don't use all 9,000 RPM. So let's go through this engine then. So that's 4, 5, it kicks there, 7. It just goes through all these levels, and it seems to kick again at 5,000 RPM, and then at about 7,500 RPM, it's so exciting at the top end. It rewards literally whatever you're doing. On the road, pottering around, it's enjoyable, it sounds great, but on track, I haven't driven it on track, but it must be sensational as well, just to spend all your time up in that, right, the sort of the higher echelons of the rev range. Just brilliant. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the ride in this car, because it was something that I actually didn't notice, and that might sound like bad road testing, and I suppose it probably is, but I didn't notice it right until almost the end. We'd been filming up in North Wales, I drove it all the way home and got onto roads that I know really well, and it suddenly occurred to me when I went over a particular patch of road that I know really well, just how well the car had coped with it. In fact, how it hadn't really noticed it at all seemingly. And I think that's really speaks volumes, because that's what you want fantastic suspension to do. You want it to be unnoticed, unruffled, to give you all the feedback that you want, but not to be constantly letting you think, oh, I wish it was a bit sort of more comfortable over here, or I wish it was a bit firmer through there. It just dealt with everything. Of course, there's the sport button which firms up the PASM slightly. I did pressed it. Yeah, it's a bit firmer. That would be suitable for track, I thought. And then I turned it off again, and that was pretty much it, because in its standard setting, it just does everything you want on the road. It's that good. One of the curious things with this GT3 is that as soon as I got into it, it felt small, which a 911 should really. They always have done. They've always felt more wieldy. The extraordinary thing is I can remember driving a 991 for the first time and thinking how massive it felt compared to a 997, and yet this now feels, I suppose, like a 997 did, really. Some of that I think is actually because we've got the steering feel back in this car, so it feels more wieldy again. Oh. We've got lovely dry roads now to enjoy this on, but even when I was driving us around in, well, freezing conditions this morning, for a start, you've got enough feel to enjoy the car. You've also got staggering amounts of traction, which not all cars on Cup 2s have. I'm talking about you, BMW. The chassis balance on this second generation GT3 is another thing that just seems to have stepped up a notch. It's helped, obviously, again, I keep going back to it, but by that steering, because you feel more in touch with the front end, and the fact that you can drive it around at low speeds in the wet and you always know where the front is, and you can feel that it's just going to push a little bit, which is, no, understeer is not a feeling that you intrinsically want in a car, perhaps, but in the 911 it's all part of that car's DNA, and it's just, you know, it leads to other things. It's the gateway to, in a way, the handling for the rest of the car. So when you're driving it around in the wet, to have that feeling, to know how the front end is behaving is absolutely crucial to it being a 911, really. But the harder you push on dry roads, the way the car gets into a corner and the way the rear follows, and it feels like such a short chassis, and then you can get on the power and you feel the rear moving around. You can use the traction, but it helps you out of the corner, seems to straighten the line, and it's just such a brilliant feeling. You don't have to be right on the edge on a track to get this feeling either, and it makes it, again, I'll come back to the word, it's involving. This 6-speed shift seems to have got better as well, certainly since the first time I tried it, which was in the 911R, and it was quite light in that, and which wasn't a bad thing, but I think it seems like, to me, it's got a bit more of the character of the 6-speed in the Cayman, which still has to be the absolute benchmark for being a creamy 6-speed manual. I just love the fact that every shift you have can be enjoyable. The paddle shift really is only exciting when you're right up at the top end and you're marvelling at the milliseconds or lack thereof that it takes to shift. In this, you can short shift. Doesn't matter, you're still doing something. You're still interacting with the car. Now, some of you have been waiting for the film for some time, but one of the benefits of the fact that you've had to wait a little while for this film is that I've subsequently driven the 991 Gen 2 GT3 RS, and so I can actually compare the two cars. So it's obviously driven different roads. One was in Germany and the RS, and the GT3 was in the UK. The biggest difference is obviously straight away, you can't get a manual in the RS, which is a shame, but equally I understand it. For all that, obviously, I've said in the other film, I love manual gearboxes. I do appreciate a paddle shift, and I can understand that the RS is brilliant, and it's a fantastic, that PDK is incredible. The shifts right up at 9,000 RPM, unbelievable, and it does help you get the most from the chassis in the easiest fashion possible. You know, it's a car about lap times, and I think that is possibly the biggest distinction now, because the engines honestly didn't really feel very different at all between the two cars. They are really essentially the same engine. There's a little bit more power in the RS, but we're not talking big differences here. The spec of the two cars was slightly curious because they were sort of the wrong way around in some respects. So we had steel brakes and no cage in the RS and a leather steering wheel. And then we had a full cage in carbon ceramics on the GT3, so slightly odd, and in fact the GT3 therefore really almost felt more racy than the RS, and I suppose that again just shows how close they are. From the outside, still the RS looks like the more dramatic car, looks like the track refugee that you want it to. The steering, again, I actually preferred in the standard GT3. I'm not sure if it's to do with the cambers potentially in the RS, which give it that perhaps a little bit more agility and help get the most out of it on track, but it meant that just around the straight ahead, where the GT3 left you feeling really, really connected because it was just perfectly weighted. There was no slack at all. In the RS, very subtle, but it just felt like it took just a moment or two to come into its ideal weighting. So yeah, again, for me, the GT3 felt like all you'd need, to be honest. So, and you get the manual box. So of the two cars, it was the GT3 that left a greater impression on me, I suppose, and I'm not sure that the RS gave me so much more that I would feel that I desperately wanted it. I'd like to try one with a Visac pack. Perhaps it might elevate it that little bit further, that meant you felt you needed that in addition to a standard GT3, as it were. Talking specs, I do have a point to make about that. There's obviously been a lot of talk about whether you should have a wing on your 911 GT3 or not, because they now offer the touring. I would certainly want the manual. I think it just adds so much to this car, as you can tell if you watch our other film on this. But to be honest, beforehand I thought, yeah, I'd like the idea of a touring because it's a bit subtler. Having driven this, I now literally couldn't care. Just a GT3, whether it's touring or not, that's what I want. I probably would do without the framework in the back, just because it actually makes it more usable. On that note, I've always thought, if one day I have the money, I would have this fixed back bucket in the driver's seat, and then I'd get the hinged bucket for the passenger seat, so I can pop stuff in the back. I'd have mismatched seats. Some people's OCD would be going crazy at this point, I know, but there we are. That's what I'd do. All in all then, the GT3 is fabulous. It's a car that it's hard not to recommend. I mean, it's just brilliant. Perhaps it's summed up best by the fact that I always, the question you get asked a lot when you do this job is what's your favourite car? And of course, you want the 5-car garage, but you can't go into that with a lot of people. So I always said, if I happen to win the lottery on a weekend, the car that I would walk out and buy straight away was a GT3, and that's been the way for a long time. It used to be whatever the current one was, basically that was generally my favourite car. With the 991 Gen 1, that wasn't the case, and I was left slightly, I was like, well, what would be the car I'd walk straight out and buy? With this car, it's come back again. It feels that good. I just desperately wanted to have one in my life after living with it for a couple of days. It was absolutely brilliant. I did so many miles in it and loved every single one of them. It is a tremendous, fabulous, wonderful, beguiling, interactive, amazing car. Wow, you just wouldn't get bored of that, ever.
If you'd like to see more of the latest GT3, then why not click on the top box on the left and watch our short film on why the manual gearbox matters. Alternatively, if you'd like to find out more about the latest Rennsport version of the GT3, then just click on the lower box.